JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is a series that has been around for an unbelievable amount of time, having started all the way back in 1987. Part of the reason it's been around so long is not only the author, Hirohiko Araki's unwillingness to age, but also his unwillingness to keep things the same. For those of you who don't know, JoJo's is a story that spans 9 different parts, with each part having a new protagonist, new set of characters, new location, and almost new everything. Today I'm going to rank all these parts from my least favorite to my personal favorite in numerical order. Note that this is all my personal opinion, and if you have a different opinion, don't panic. Instead, comment down below what your personal rankings of all the JoJo's parts are. Before we get to the ranking, I want to know that there will be light spoilers for the series as a whole, except for a certain part where there will be a heavy amount of spoilers, but don't worry, I will provide you with a suitable warning ahead of time and a timestamp on screen to skip to. With that out of the way, let's rank some JoJo's parts. At number 9, we have the newest and currently ongoing part, Part 9, The JoJo Lands. I know that some of you might be saying that it's not fair to rank JoJo Lands since at the time of writing, we have only the introductory chapter to go off of, and you're right, that would be unfair, so we're not going to do that. I wasn't going to include JoJo Lands at first, but with just how much I loved this first chapter, I wanted to briefly discuss it. And what a first chapter it is. Oh my god, I love every single thing about this new part, particularly the new protagonist, Jodio Joestar. Not only because of his silly name, but because he has so much personality and spunk despite the little we've actually seen of him. Already, he seems like more of an actual character than most of the JoJo's protagonists, with just his outfit alone. My favorite part was his inner thoughts of, sometimes I'm like this, and sometimes I'm like this. Same such praise goes to his stand, November Rain, which is a fun difference from all the humanoid stands we've been getting over the years. Of course, I can't skip out on Dragona Joestar, Jodio's older brother, who has just as much, if not more spunk than Jodio himself. His stand so far is my favorite, because of just how many fun possibilities it has for fights in the future. The setting of modern day Hawaii is also something that really intrigues me, especially with the combination of an underground criminal organization. I really hope that the crime and cartel aspect takes a more prevalent and consistent role. That's kind of what I wish had happened in part 5 with the whole mafia thing, but it seems that Araki already has me covered. Even if he doesn't, I still trust whatever he's got cooking up for us, because if it's anywhere near as good as this first chapter, this could very well end up being the best JoJo's part. Alright, enough gushing, on to the actual rankings. Yep, at number 8 we have my least favorite part of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Part 6, Stone Ocean. Before all the Stone Ocean fans click off, let me explain. The best way to describe JoJo's as a whole is a cake. Each part of JoJo's is a different piece of that cake, each with their own unique flavor. Everybody is going to have a different opinion on what flavors are their favorite and what flavors are their least favorite. Stone Ocean, in my opinion, is coffee cake. People who like coffee cake also like coffee, and people who like coffee love coffee. Like, love it so much that you make it pretty much your entire personality. People who like Part 6 make it their entire personality, having Jolyne as their profile picture, wallpaper, phone case, etc, etc. Then there are people who don't like coffee, and can't stand the taste of coffee. I am one of those people, and I can't stand the taste of Stone Ocean. None of the characters I find interesting. I mean, they're not really necessarily bad. I just don't find them compelling enough for me to really care about them. I don't really even find any of their stands that cool. The entire part is just so boring and lackluster with not really anything memorable except for the ending and Pucci. In fact, Pucci was one of the only reasons I even made it through this part because I was intrigued by him, but not really because of his character, but because of his connection to Dio. I think that this part could have benefited from an entirely new setting as well. Araki was clearly running out of ideas too, and it probably didn't help that he boxed himself into a corner by having the location take place in a Florida prison. Now all he has to work with are the 3 things that Florida has to offer: swamps, crocodiles, and meth heads. I'm mainly disappointed that he barely used that last one. As I mentioned earlier, the ending is the best part of Stone Ocean, with it wrapping up the entirety of the main universe's timeline beautifully. But for now, Stone Ocean is going to sink to the bottom at number 8. Unsurprisingly, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 1, Phantom Blood, is my second least favorite JoJo's part. This was the first part that Araki had ever written, and it was my first ever forte into JoJo's. Strangely enough, JoJo's is actually the third manga I'd ever read, and I initially started it not knowing, so I had zero expectations and pretty much barely any other manga to compare it to. And somehow, it still found a way to be boring. I don't think anybody else is going to disagree with me on that. If Stone Ocean was coffee cake, then Phantom Blood is vegetable cake. Nobody likes vegetable cake. I don't know why vegetable cake even exists, other than because somebody decided to make it as a joke. At first when you read JoJo's, it's not the easiest thing to take seriously. Lines like, "How many breads have you eaten in your life?" Initially, it kind of turned me away from JoJo's, and it took me a while to realize that that was just kind of part of its charm. The protagonist, Jonathan, is just as plain as his name is. He is the most cookie-cutter protagonist possible, with him only ever being there because the story needs a protagonist. Araki could have used something, any character trait for Jonathan imaginable, to make him just a bit more fun, but no. It probably doesn't help that Hamon is one of the worst magic systems in anime, period. The only thing that's really holding up Part 1 above Part 6, in my opinion, is Dio Brando, because of just how much fun he is. Sure, the same complaint about Joseph could be made for Dio. He's very cookie-cutter in terms of what we get from an antagonistic villain, as the only reason he is evil is because the story needs a bad guy. Funny enough, I think that that's why he works so well, is because Dio is just one cold, calculating jerk who wants to be a villain just for the fun of it. I mean, he decides to make Jonathan's life a living hell just because he felt like it. This heavy exaggeration of everything about Dio is, in my opinion, where JoJo started to find its footing, but not quite yet. Still though, Dio can't save the ship from sinking all the way down to 7th place. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 3 Stardust Crusaders was the turning point for JoJo's as a whole, and it really showed off Araki's adaptability as a mangaka, with him replacing the system of old, Hamon, for the new iconic stands. I find it funny that JoJo's has both my least favorite magic system in anime, while simultaneously having my favorite magic system in anime. Stands and Part 3 were when JoJo's finally hit it big. Without it, it wouldn't be the series that we know and love today. This was the point in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure that everybody told me to get to when I started reading it, since the common consensus is that this is where JoJo's finally finds its footing. And I cannot disagree more. Stardust Crusaders starts out extremely interesting, especially for me who went into the series completely blind and not knowing that stands were even a thing. The introduction to them is swaggering as we meet our main cast, Jotaro, Joseph, Polnareff, Kakyoin, Avdol, and Iggy, as they travel across the world with their stands to put a stop to the newly awakened Dio, wielding a powerful yet mysterious stand of his own. This is all done in great style, with some of the initial fights being some of the best in all of anime, while being distinctly JoJo's. This is the part where I finally understood the charm of JoJo's, and I was loving every second of it. I experienced awesome battle after 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 awesome battle and after awesome battle. Stardust Crusaders is a dark, dark, dark chocolate cake. Some people really like chocolate in general, so for them, the more chocolate is the better. For me though, after a few bites of it, I find it to be too much for my taste. I would have rathered something with a more normal amount of chocolate. That's how I felt about Stardust Crusaders. I was loving it at first, but pretty soon everything just kind of started to blend together. JoJo's adopted a simple Monster of the Week format, where each fight would span just a couple of chapters. We get introduced to a new villain, good guys beat villain, and cool fight over and over again, with none of the fights really having any impact on the story at all. Stardust Crusaders painfully overstays its welcome for me, and by the time Egypt rolled around, I just wanted it to be over so bad. The coolest thing about Part 3 was probably the fight with Dio, because I love Dio, and his new ability just gives him more opportunities to be the maniacal menace that he is. And that's why I rate Stardust Crusaders at number 6. If Stardust Crusaders was dark, dark, dark chocolate, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 2 Battle Tendency is just a normal chocolate cake. It has everything that you could ever want in a story: a cool protagonist, fun side characters, compelling plot, and of course, amazing action. I was completely taken aback with Battle Tendency just because of how much it deviated from Part 1. Joseph Joestar is a much better protagonist than Jonathan, and I'd argue still one of the best, if not the best, the series has introduced to the stage. As I mentioned earlier, Jonathan felt like he was there to fill a role and not much else. But when it comes to Joseph, he doesn't fill the role as a protagonist, he excels at it. He is so much fun to watch just be his cocky self, who always finds himself in precarious situations, but always comes out of them with a smile. This especially makes the battles fun, as Joseph is also extremely crafty and doesn't play fair. He'll pull out any dirty trick in the book to gain an upper hand. It's so much fun to either see his plans come together or fail horribly, but in the end, he always gets back up with a cocky grin. He even makes Hamon somewhat interesting, but I think that was because Hamon at this point was kind of on its way out, so Araki just said screw it and let the characters go nuts with their abilities. As I mentioned earlier, all the other characters are a treat to be with too, especially Caesar Zeppeli, who manages to be the yin to Joseph's yang. The two managed to be an extremely fun duo, only rivaled in my opinion by another Zeppeli Joestar duo that we'll discuss later. Though the reason I've put Battle Tendency at number 5 is because Araki still didn't quite know what he was doing yet with JoJo's, and wouldn't figure that out for a little while. This shines through from time to time, as Part 2 can be a little bit messy in terms of pacing, and can drag on at times. Anyways, Battle Tendency sits at my 5th favorite JoJo's part. Almost everything about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 5 Golden Wind is amazing. I was immediately sold on the premise of the story about a boy rising his way through the mafia to dismantle it from the inside, as movies like Goodfellas, The Irishman, and A Bronx Tale are some of my favorite movies ever made. Though as I mentioned earlier, the mob and crime aspect kinda dissolved into the background as the part went on, I was still enthralled with the plot through and through. Golden Wind has my favorite group of main characters out of any in the series, with Giorno, Bucciarati, Mista, Fugo, Abacchio, Trish, and especially Narancia. Every single one of these characters, except for one that we'll talk about in a minute, bounce off each other magnificently. I especially love it when the two of them have to team up and take down a bad guy, because all of their stands complement each other as well. Speaking of battles, this is after I feel Araki found his footing with JoJo's, so of course the battles are going to be top notch, especially since Golden Wind is sort of a breath of fresh air when it comes to pacing. As I mentioned before, some of the earlier parts can really drag on with fights that don't really affect the overarching plot. In Part 5, it feels like every fight has real weight to it. I think that it's not only because they all transition extremely well, but because Araki has to introduce all these characters and their abilities. Golden Wind doesn't have a scene where every character gathers in a circle and state their name, motivations, backstory, and stand, but instead they slowly open up as characters as the story goes on through these fights. The only character out of the group, though, who feels a little bit out of place is actually Giorno Giovanna, the protagonist of Part 5. He's kind of like Jonathan in that he's pretty much a cookie-cutter character, created simply to fit a role, but I can kind of see why. Araki left that spotlight to all the other members of the gang to fill, and I'm glad he did because I don't know if I would have liked Part 5 that much if I didn't. The reason I have Part 5 at number 4 on this list, though, is for two reasons. Number 1 being Diavolo, and number 2 being the ending. Alright, spoiler warning, if you haven't finished Part 5 yet and don't want to get spoiled on everything that happens in the ending, then skip to this time on screen. Again, the last call for spoilers. Alright, I think we're good. Back to where we were. Diavolo. Diavolo was very much on track to becoming my favorite JoJo's villain and possibly one of my favorite villains of all time because of his counterpart, Doppio. I love the aspect of the split personality and the fact that Doppio could only communicate with him through a phone. I was so excited to see how this was going to be explored, especially since Diavolo and Doppio didn't realize that they had split personality disorder. Unfortunately, Araki kinda just got rid of this at the last second, leaving Doppio to literally die, and kind of just abandoning everything that he was built up to be. I still think that Diavolo and King Crimson on his own was very cool, but I can't help but feel that there was a huge missed opportunity here. The only other thing I have to complain about is that stupid flashback at the end. I consider Golden Wind to be a very fancy wedding cake. Some people might just like how rich with flavor and expensive it tastes. I think that super fancy cake, also like dark chocolate cake, could benefit from just toning it down a bit. That's how I feel about this weird clunky flashback to the rock thing at the end of part 5. I know that it was trying to hammer home that the idea of everything that happened was because of fate and such, but it was just done so badly. I think it could have been just removed entirely. It completely took the wind out of all the cool stuff that happened in the final battle, and should have just not been there at all. I hate this ending with a passion, but I still think that everything else in Golden Wind is amazing and executed perfectly, which is why I rate it at number 4. You know how I said earlier that I disagreed that Araki found his footing with Stardust Crusaders? Well, that's because I don't think he found his footing until JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 4, Diamond is Unbreakable. At least this is when JoJo's finally clicked for me. I liked JoJo's before, don't get me wrong, but just something about Part 4 finally made me a bona fide JoJo's fan, almost from the get-go. A lot of people told me that I should watch the anime for Diamond is Unbreakable, and after the slog that was Stardust Crusaders, I was pretty open to a change of scenery. I'm so glad that I did, because right from the start I was hooked with Part 4. Mostly what pulled me in was the laid-back premise of a slice-of-life small-town mystery adventure, which is something I would usually not be up for at all, but it's exactly the change I needed after the globe-trotting madness of Part 3. Diamond is Unbreakable, in opinion, is different from all the other pieces of the cake, in which it's only a humble, delicious cupcake. Some people might not be satisfied with the cupcake and want more, but for me, a cupcake is just fine. David Productions really went above and beyond with Part 4 by making use of a creative color palette in the anime to draw you into Morio with a sense of comfort. Honestly, the highlight I feel of Diamond is Unbreakable is Morio, with just how well Araki builds up the town as its own unique character. Funny enough, the world building I feel in Part 4, which takes place entirely in one small rural town, is leagues ahead of Part 3, which takes place in almost every single continent. That's because all of the people living in the town really help to make it feel like just one big community. Josuke, Jotaro, Koichi, Okuyasu, Rohan, Yukiko, Shigechi, Tonio, and all the others coming together to try and solve the mystery of what's going on in their small town is so much fun to watch. All of them are interesting on their own too, and Araki really does a lot to flesh them out by giving them their own solo fights, which most of them not really having anything to do with the overarching story. This was one of my major cons in Part 3, but in Part 4 I'm praising this choice because I actually like all these characters and spending time with them in Morio. Of course, we can't forget about the overarching plot of Part 4, which by its own merits is excellent. By that I mean the goal to find and put a stop to the malicious small-town serial killer, Yoshikage Kira. Kira is my favorite JoJo's villain, and one of my favorite villains in all of media. He fits perfectly in Part 4 as just a regular dude who wants to live a quiet, uninterrupted life. Aside from the whole hand fetish thing and the killing innocent people, his desires aren't so bad. Pretty much all of Part 4 is just showing how far Kira is willing to go in order to achieve his so-called quiet life. He's one of the main reasons why Part 4 is so high in this list. The only reason it's at number 3 is I still think that Part 4 can suffer from pacing issues, as sometimes the battles and episodes could definitely have been shortened. Some of them can get a little messy at times, but I still really enjoy them. As I mentioned earlier, I love all these characters. Anyways, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 4, Diamond is Unbreakable, has solidified itself as my third favorite JoJo part. This might surprise literally all of you to hear that JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 7, Steel Ball Run, is in my opinion the second best JoJo's part. Yes, the second best. For those of you who aren't aware, Steel Ball Run is widely considered to be Araki's finest work, and by that logic, the best JoJo's part. Steel Ball Run is a good birthday cake, because everybody loves a good birthday cake. Only a madman would hate just a regular good old birthday cake. I'll admit that after Sono, I thought maybe I was a little burnt out on JoJo's. I was thinking of taking a break from JoJo's for a while and coming back to it later, but I decided to read the first chapter of Steel Ball Run because I was just curious. Keep in mind, I went into every single JoJo's part utterly and completely blind, so you can imagine my confusion when I realized that Steel Ball Run takes place in an entirely different alternate universe than parts 1 and 6. It features an alternate reality Jonathan Joestar, who now goes by Johnny Joestar, and alternate reality Caesar Zeppeli, now called Gyro Zeppeli, participating in one big horse race across the US set in the 1800s. Any fatigue or burnout I thought I felt was immediately gone, and I was hooked from the get-go. I think that going into Steel Ball Run completely blind is the best way to read Steel Ball Run, because I had absolutely no idea what was going on. I thought for a long time that Araki had completely gotten rid of stands, and then I was so hyped when they were reintroduced. All the small callbacks to previous parts were so hyped too, like the time that Stroheim just kind of pulled up on his weird mechanized horse. I know it's just cheap nostalgia plays, but they work so well. This entire part is amazing as well, because it just feels like everything Araki has learned over the course of his career dumped into one big, over-the-top story. He turned Jonathan, my least favorite JoJo's protagonist, into my second favorite in a matter of minutes by making him an actual character with personality, the spin, no pun intended, of Steel Ball Run being the story of how Johnny learned to walk again both literally and figuratively was incredible to see. Of course, we can't forget about the best JoJo side character, Gyro, who very much could have been the protagonist of Part 7 with just how much fun he is. Still though, him and Johnny's friendship is what made Steel Ball Run work so well for me. The little gags that they have, like the one where Gyro would tell Johnny a joke that he thought of, and instead of laughing, Johnny will instead give a YouTube video essay level breakdown on why the joke is funny, gets me every time. Another highlight of Steel Ball Run is the setting. The western tone of the part makes it feel like not only completely different from any other JoJo's part, but any other manga I've ever read. It probably helps that this is where Araki peaked in terms of drawing backgrounds, because of just how well he depicts the West with so many amazing double-page spreads. The entire idea of the race across the US itself does wonders for the pacing, because despite at the time it was finished being the longest JoJo's part, it feels like it goes by so fast. I loved every minute of Steel Ball Run, and it's helped me solidify JoJo's Bizarre Adventure as one of my favorite series today. Without it, I probably wouldn't be writing this video in the first place. So why do I only have it in second place, if I have no complaints? Well, that's because...
薬剤の流れの中にいて私を攻撃できた者もかつて誰一人としていない Wonder of You
Yep, you heard it right. Not only is JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 8 Jojolion my favorite JoJo's part, I think it's the best one to date. I don't want to say too much about Part 8 because it's in sort of a weird limbo. A lot of people who wouldn't shut up about JoJo's and kept constantly recommending JoJo's to me have not read Jojolion. I noticed this was the case for a lot of people online too. It's a shame because a lot of people are speed reading it now without really taking the time to properly enjoy Jojolion in order to get to JoJo lands. So if you are a JoJo's fan and are speed reading Jojolion or planning to skip it entirely, I would advise against it. I think that this part also greatly benefited me from going into it completely blind without knowing anything. So you can imagine my excitement when I found out that we were still in the alternate universe, but returning to the town of Morio with Josuke Higashikita, once again serving as the protagonist. Keep in mind that up until Steel Ball Run, Part 4 was my favorite part with Josuke being my favorite protagonist. So a remake of Part 4 in the alternate reality had me ecstatic. Then I quickly realized Jojolion was very different from Part 4. Right off the bat, things seemed off in Jojolion. Like there's something sinister working behind the scenes, but you can't quite put your finger on it. Pretty much Jojolion is the story of unraveling the mystery to find out what's really going on in Morio, in a sort of Nancy Drew adventure style. It all begins when our protagonist wakes up on the beach not having any memory of who he is or why he's here, nicknamed Josuke Higashikita. The most interesting part of Josuke for me is him coming to terms with who he is, and this identity crisis that he has is, believe it or not, what made him my favorite JoJo. And also the gag of him always sleeping under the mattress and all the other characters acting like it was normal. Speaking of other characters, amazing transition, I was also taken aback by them. I was expecting this entire town to once again come together to solve the mystery and defeat the evil, but Araki was still able to subvert my expectations. Instead, the other townsfolk are also part of the mystery, as Josuke has to figure out who is his ally and who is his enemy. Often that line can become very gray, so he has to be very careful about who he trusts with what information or what information he can trust. I really wish that they could have been around during Jojolion's 10-year run, because I can't imagine all the theory crafting going on in the community, and to see those theories either confirmed or shot down must have been really fun, because Jojolion is going to go beyond and stay at number 1, unless Jojo Lands one day overtakes it. Anyways, thank you all for watching me rank all the parts of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Comment down below what your ranking of each part is, and I'll catch you guys next time. See you then.